Hello, Goddess. Welcome back. This is Andrea with You Are Mind, Body, Soul, where I guide goddesses to bridge the mind, body, and soul. We do this through psychosomatic education, consciousness reconditioning, as well as goddess alchemy. Come on in, make yourself comfortable. I have myself a glass of water. Oops, just dropped my pen. But that's okay. We're going to talk about a really important topic, shadow work. I've been waiting a while to do this topic to see how it was actually going to filter through me, like how I was going to end up channeling this topic so that it makes the most sense because it's very, very important. And it's been a big part of my journey. So I figure because we are moving into the divine feminine season, which is the fall and the winter, and we are moving into the darkness and the stillness, which is the womb, that place of pure potentiation, that we would start to step into some of these more darker topics. If you haven't checked out my video on divine feminine and channeling and divination, please check that out. I'm going to link it below in this video. And before we get started, please remember to like this video if you are resonating with my voice and this message. Please share this video so that other goddesses such as yourself can receive this information, and be sure to subscribe. I am just stuttering myself away today, but it's all good. Please be sure to subscribe if you are new to the channel. So let's get into it. So basically, I want to get started with the statement that you want to be the product that you not only want to be the product that your environment needs, rather than being a product of your environment. What you want to do is to actually start to build yourself up and fortify your vibrational frequency so that you are then the source and the creators of your environment, of your personal reality. So many of us have been taught to just exist by default and to accept the cards, so to speak, in life that we have been given. Therefore, we become a product of whatever the environment in which we were raised and brought up in and programmed and conditioned by. We can take this a step further by then becoming the product that our environment actually needs, rather than being the one that is influenced by our environment. We can take it up a level and we can become the product within that same environment that is actually needed to shed light and to spread energy, positive energy within that environment. And then as you start to move in your alchemical expansion, you start to realize that you can then start to create environments of your own volition based on the power of your personal vibration. And those are my hopes and what I am seeking to create within this temple space, on this page, and within the academy, and across, the space-time expansion of the women that I am serving. Okay, the goddesses that I am serving. So you are a goddess once you step into this space and you start to tune into this video. So I wanted to just start with that statement. And of course, I have my notes here as always. You know how we get down. You know how we do. So I started to do shadow work quite some time ago, probably when I was getting out of college after I went through one of my first big heartbreaks. I have a foundation, I have a pre-medical foundation, which is comprised of a foundation in psychology, molecular, and microbiology. So I study the human body, I study the human psyche, okay? And when I graduated college, I started to delve more deeper into spirituality. And in the recent past, I've started to dive deeper into my own personal conscious awareness, as well as generalized human consciousness, and more specifically, feminine consciousness as a whole. Okay. And shadow work has contributed to my journey by really helping me to heal from the wounds that I found myself having as I started to become dedicated to my self examination. And I was just listening to an audio this morning that was saying that you have to be willing to be a completely honest judge of your own character and the flaws that you have without compromise. You need to be very clear and very aware of the flaws that you have as a human being if you want to evolve. And what shadow work does, the power and the gift that shadow work gives us, is the ability and the opportunity to look at those parts of ourselves that we would prefer to reject within ourselves, which is simply a reflection of that which society has rejected, characteristics and behaviors that society has rejected, that we have now internalized, and we have put ourselves, aspects of ourselves, namely the shadow aspects of ourselves, in a place where we don't want to acknowledge, accept, or embrace them. That is exactly what the shadow is. The shadow self is the parts of ourselves that are relegated to the timeout space, right? Timeout. You're over there. You're doing naughty behavior. These are the no-nos of life. And when I started to tap into my shadow, because my shadow for a long time manifested in the form of a lot of anger. And as I started to liberate myself from those environments that were triggering me and bringing up a lot of anger, feelings of anger, and I started to find peace in my life as I found that separation, which was, I found that separation. It was a very bold move of like moving away from the state that I was born and raised in, out of that community. Took a lot of courage. And as I really started to fight for my peace and establish a new baseline of happiness for my reality, and then I found the occasional trigger, like the triggers, those things that started to trigger my anger would happen less often. When they did happen, I started to question, why was this something that was such a huge bother for me? Why was I letting this take me out of this peaceful element that I had created for myself? And this is when I really started to deepen into my shadow work, and I started to become a more whole, authentic version of myself. And that is what I want to offer you through this process and through this training. So, this is definitely going to be a powerful training. Okay. And if you implement the guidelines, I have 6 steps for doing shadow work that I'm going to offer you today in this video. And if you take this guidance and you allow yourself to work through this process, you're going to see a lot of things change in your life. And with that being said, talking about working through the process of integrating new things into our consciousness and into our behaviors and habits, anything that you're working on changing and embodying and integrating as a part of yourself, you want to give yourself space and grace. So anywhere between 6 months to 18 months, just to find a place where you are mastering and embodying that thing, while simultaneously always allowing yourself to be open for your perspective to be changed and enlightened and shifted. So anything that you are learning and anything that you are being educated on, it's very important for you to embrace that thing, but then also be willing to discard that same lesson that leveled you up previously for something that is a more evolved version of that thing. And shadow work, doing your shadow work, will teach you how to compassionately confront these aspects of yourselves that are ready for evolution. And I want to thank you so much for joining me in this space, because this is a powerful place to be, which is at the forefront of your personal goddess evolution. And side by side and married and connected to your own personal development. So please drop a black heart. We're doing black today. Drop that below if you're feeling this message so far. And please be sure to hit that like button so that we can get this algorithm popping and get this message out to more goddesses. Okay. So I dealt with a tremendous amount of anxiety and depression from when I was really young. So for those of you that don't know my story, I actually grew up with a lot of physical abuse and verbal abuse when I was a kid. I was beaten a lot. I was told that I was nothing, that I was called all different kinds of names that really affected my psyche. Okay. I was ignored, like so many different painful things that I grew up with that was normal for me. Okay. And this really affected my psyche. It affected me tremendously. And as I grew up, even as a young kid, excuse me, it showed up in the form primarily as anxiety and depression. Okay. And it came up in the form of me not loving myself. And I came to a place where I really had to ask myself, well, what does self love actually mean? Okay. And you can write that out. So, because is a training, I encourage you to have a journal and take notes. I'm going to be asking you some questions. And also, I'm going to spell out this 6-step process of how to do shadow work because it's just a game changer, like all the things I talk about on this channel. We're here to change the game, right? We're here to change the whole playing field, not just the game. All right. Um, so the anxiety and the depression that was coming up for me in my formative years was quite cyclical. So I started to realize, and now that, I am more older and I have served as a guide for a lot of women on their journey, which has caused me to become more dedicated and to become more vulnerable with myself as I place myself in novel instances and in which I have to, show up as a greater and higher version of myself so that I can show up for people that need me in a way that is authentic and in a way that is spiritually mature. I've had to continue to work through this process at every step of my life, at every step of this journey. And this is what I'm encouraging for you. Okay. So, shadow work allowed me to become more compassionate with myself as I started to realize that the patterns, the emotional and chemical patterns of anxiety and depression, which I had normalized since I was a kid, it really started to make me look at those things because I could be going through a place where everything was peaceful, but then all of a sudden, for no reason, I would feel depressed. It's kind of like seasonal affective disorder. Sometimes things like seasonal affective disorder can be as simple as your body having a lack of vitamin D. Okay. But then at the same time, certain things that are cyclical like this can also just be because our bodies on a biological level have been entrained to naturally respond in a depressive or low vibrational way automatically. And as you grow and as you develop in your consciousness and as you start to participate in the courses that I'm doing, that I create for you, or like you seek guidance, one-on-one coaching, you'll really start to catch your cycles and to catch these things that you are going through. So that's what I started to do. I kind of started to just like catch myself in the act. So I would step outside of my natural baseline response to the things that were creating anxiety and depression. And I started to question those things. Like I would catch them as they were happening. Okay. And this is the power of allowing yourself to tap into that higher consciousness. You're really able to interact with life from a higher perspective and not just, again, that default space. Okay. So what we're going to do is start to move through this 6-step process of how to do shadow work. Now that we kind of know a little bit more about what shadow work is, what the shadow is, and I'm going to talk to you about that as we go along, what specifically the shadow is, because your shadow self is going to show up in different forms depending on who you are and then based on your own personal design. All right. But the very first thing that you want to do to start to get into this shadow work space is to become emotionally lucid. One of my mentors calls it being emotionally current. So that is when you are aware of what your emotions are and you are able to label those emotions. You can put a name on them based on how you are perceiving those and what you would like to call them as a reflection of what is coming from yourself. Okay, and you're willing to look at those things for what they presently are and how they are presently showing up in your life. Okay, so for example, okay, you want to be clear on what is irritating you. Let's say that you found you have like this thing that like irritates you every time, or this thing that a specific person does that just inevitably just irritates you every time. Okay. And you can label that emotion as irritation. Okay. You're very clear about the fact that this is irritating. This is irritating you, right? Because and I mean, it could seem so simple to be able to take an emotion and to label it, but oftentimes it's not, because it's on the shadow side of things. A lot of those emotions, those challenging emotions and behaviors, we oftentimes don't really want to admit that we are experiencing these things, that we are being bothered, that we're being irritated by certain things, or that we are actually truly having this response, this emotional response. Because again, we're dealing with the voice of society. Well, society says that I'm not supposed to feel this way about this situation or this person. I'm not supposed to feel this desire in my body. I should feel ashamed about, this desire and those things that society is judging us on. So just having the power of being emotionally clear and emotionally fluid and current is step number one. So one of the things that I have learned to do is to find the niggle. Okay, it's called a niggle. And what a niggle is when you have this feeling, okay, this sensation that you're feeling and that is irritating you. It's like having a blister in your finger. Okay, it's very subtle. You don't really know that the blister is there until you go to like grab something and you feel that it's there. It's very subtle. It's like having something in your tooth and not knowing that it's stuck in the back of your tooth until you go to chew with that part of your mouth, and boom, you realize you got something stuck in your teeth that's irritating you. And now you're like hyper fixated on it because you didn't know it was there before, right? So these irritants that are actually directing us to where our shadow aspects are, they are typically very subtle, which is why this work is not easy to do. And that is also why being able to be in contact and be in touch with your shadow is so important. Because if you're not able to be honest and to find and to label these emotions and to identify these small niggling feelings, they can end up running our entire life. Okay. And when you are allowing your life to be ran from a space where you are on autopilot in your responses to things because you are not emotionally current, which means that you are running on emotional patterns that you were running on when you were a teenager or a child. Okay, would be the same as having a child operate a vehicle. Okay. We're just going through life and we are letting our wounded inner children operate these vehicles. Okay. So let me know if this is resonating with you. Drop a black heart below. This is good water. So these things can be small, but they will irritate the hell out of you. And they are there for a reason. Nothing is for nothing. Everything has a purpose. Every experience has a reason. And as we start to expand in our consciousness and we are aware of the subtle things that are affecting our reality, check out the Mind Feminine and the Divination video. Go check that out to find out more about these subtle experiences and these subtle influences in our reality. We want to be aware and we want to turn up the volume on those things so that we can use them as tools for empowerment versus disempowerment. So the second step to doing shadow work, after you have found the emotion and you have labeled the emotion, what you want to do is draw that emotional response back to its original source. So the first time you started to experience anger, or the first time you started to experience a certain behavior in response to something that was happening in your environment that was uncomfortable for you, or something that was happening in your environment and in your reality where you felt like you needed to have this particular type of behavior in order to cope, because the shadow self uses behaviors, naughty behaviors, quote unquote, to cope with life. It's a great way to know whether or not you're moving through your shadow. Okay. So it's really good to be able to come back and to find that experience. So for example, I have a fun story. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm not great with authority. I'm a bad girl. Okay. I'm naughty. My shadow self, we don't like authority. Which is why guaranteed I'm going to be independently wealthy on my own. Nothing against corporate jobs or anything. I have a corporate job, I'm a good employee or whatever. But like authority, generally speaking, there's just something in my constitution where I was born to naturally dislike authority. And it stems back to when I was young and how my parents raised me. Both of my parents are control freaks. God love them. But those people they're control freaks, okay? And what this did was it put me in a place where I always felt like I had to have this natural resistance, because a lot of their guidance that they were giving me kind of went against the natural form of who I thought I was. But at the same time, it's actually really funny because I was talking to one of my parents the other day, and they were saying, I always told you, you need to ask yourself why you're making this choice and make sure that you are actually making a choice. And one day I flipped it back on them, like, I made my decision, like, this is my decision. And they were just kind of taken aback, but that because it was like, you are really like a fiercely independent minded person. And this is just how my parents created me. I love them. But that friction caused me to kind of despise authority. So little old me and my innocence, before I became a super badass witch bitch, goddess priestess woman, I used to have these experiences that came across my path where I would be in these situations where I had to deal with authority that was not seeing me for my complete value. And this has been a theme within my life that has really triggered my shadow self to respond in ways that have gotten me hemmed up. So, for example, I've been in situations where I would just, at the drop of a dime, quit a job with no job to go to after that one. Drop that black heart below if you know this toxic behavior that I'm talking about. Oh my gosh, wait until we get to step 6. You got to stick around. So like the shadow behavior will have you out here putting yourself in circumstances because your shadow side is in its feeling, in her feelings, and you'll be out here putting yourself in compromising situations because you haven't sat with your inner child that was rejected or that was, treated in a certain way. And now you have this emotional, shadowy behavioral response to things. So my whole thing with authority since I was young was you're not the boss of me. Okay. My inner child, she don't play that. My inner child, my inner shadow child, she does not play that about authority. Okay. Um, so you want to be honest with yourself about what it is. It's caused me to have anger and resentment for certain authority figures. I have a certain pride about myself, but sometimes when I was younger, before I started to do shadow work, that pride would show up in the form of arrogance from time to time, or in a form of stubbornness and not being able to take feedback because I automatically was triggered and I thought that this person, instead of giving me constructive feedback, I would automatically think that people were criticizing me, and being negative. And so I didn't want to listen. And this is shadow behavior because, yes, when I was younger and that shadow side of myself was being developed, yes, people were criticizing me. But as I grew in my maturity, I started to realize that this is something that gets my shadow self going. But then we started having conversations, and I started to realize that there was just one aspect of myself that felt criticized, and that these people in my modern day reality are just giving feedback. So ask yourself, like, I want you to pick one emotional response that you regularly have, whatever it might be. And I want you to try to draw it back to the source of when it first happened. Okay. And I want to see if you can bring yourself into that space of emotional currency, being emotionally current and relevant, and ask yourself, is this something that is still a necessary behavior pattern? Is the thing that is bothering me something that is actually something I should be getting worked up about? Or am I running on a behavioral response and emotional response from when this type of thing started to initially happen for me, when it first started to happen? Okay, so take a moment, journal that out. Okay. And we do a lot of emotional work inside of the Feminine Alchemy and Freedom course, like how to identify your emotions, how to know what patterns and relationships are karmic in nature, when you're starting on a new path. Okay. So the third step, let's move on to step number 3. Okay. Step number 3, okay, is what is this and I kind of got into it a little bit, is what is this behavior or this emotional response helping me to feel? Okay. So what am I replacing this? What inside of me is missing that this behavior is replacing? So for example, coming back to the anger and just walking around and naturally being angry for no reason. No one is really coming towards me. After a certain while, it got to the point where it's like, okay, these people are not actually threats. They're not actual real threats. But for whatever reason, my shadow self is responding in anger. This is the emotional response that I'm having to this situation and this person. What is anger actually doing for me? What is anger actually feeling for me that I'm not willing to look at? Okay. And when I started to do my work, I started to realize that anger was showing up in defense of my sense of lack of self worth. So, because I felt like I was not worthy of being who I really wanted to be, and I felt like that lack of worthiness was showing up in the form of criticism rather than simple feedback. I was automatically being triggered by when I was told that I was nothing, and all these toxic names, and that I wasn't successful because I didn't do what this person wanted me to do. I was feeling that with anger. Okay. Instead of just being like, well, what do I need to do to make myself feel worthy and let me validate that for myself, I would show up in anger. Okay. So the responses and the behaviors that we are partaking in are typically going to fill a void, shadow, the darkness, the void, the emptiness of what actual real self examination is going to look like. And I have some examples for that. Okay. So, one example is toxic relationships. Okay. So, a lot of you may be in toxic relationships where you know that this person is not good for you. Could be a romantic toxic relationship or a professional toxic relationship. And there is something inside of you that needs to be looked at and examined in order for you to recognize that you do not need this relationship to fill that void. And oftentimes, these relationships serve as distractions. Okay. And we know that we're unhappy in these relationships, but because we find ourselves being so tangled up in the narrative and the drama that relationship is stirring up, all it does is it distracts you from the shadow aspect of yourself, which is the truth that you don't want to be alone. Trigger, I'm gonna put a trigger warning on this video because boy, this will be going off today. Me and my shadow, like once I started talking about shadow work, my shadow just be like, she be telling me everything, all her boo-boo thoughts. So you gotta watch out for those for those boo-boo thoughts. I should label this video, watch out, watch your boo-boo thoughts. Oh my gosh. Okay. Um, so the choices that you're making, like let's use overeating. So I'm gonna just tell y'all about all my shadows because I'm real cool with my shadow side. Like I have done so much shadow work that there isn't really anything that anyone can say about me where I would be like, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. Like, no, I know myself. I walk hand in hand with my shadow. Okay. I know who I am. People like to think that they could put one over on you. When you become powerful and you are in union with your shadow, you're going to be a bad mama jamma. Let me tell you. Okay. So when we're doing things like overeating, because I used to overeat a lot when I was younger. Okay. That is feeling, typically, it is filling an emotional void. Okay. And if you're trying to get yourself together nutritionally, 14-day mind, body, soul reset course is going to be the one coming up in the academy in 2024. Okay. It's feeling something when you are eating and consuming overconsumption of toxic foods that you know is not going to be good for your body anyway. It is because you are unwilling to sit and fill yourself the actual hunger that you need, the actual desire, the actual hunger of showing up and prioritizing what you're passionate about in life. That's just my opinion. Okay. And that's where I was many, many years ago. Many years ago. I'm just sharing my shadow. I'm just sharing my journey with you all because I've been there before. Okay. And we all have the power to pull ourselves out of these places and to rise above shadowy behavior. Okay. So let's see. So a lot of times, a really great space and place to begin shadow work with, aside from these journals and asking these questions and going through these steps, is really just being comfortable with being empty and being alone. Okay. Fasting, silence, celibacy are the three spaces where you are really going to be able to empty yourself so you can go through the process of filling yourself with the divine energy so that you can overcome these toxic patterns. Okay? So there was a point for me where I finally came to the realization that my shadow self just kind of fucked up my whole life. Whereas, like, wow, I was moving through some shadow behavior, and now I'm in a place where I have to sit down, where I have to be alone. Like when I tell you I've been through things, and I can speak from an authentic place of passionate understanding that this is just the nature of the human experience. Okay. When you come to that place and you're like, yo, I was being real toxic, you are going to be in a beautiful place in life. Okay. When you can really admit to yourself that, wow, I let my shadow really just run. We just ran off on the plug twice, whatever that means. But that just felt appropriate. Okay. So, step number 4. Okay. Step number 4 is making peace with your shadow through forgiveness. So, when you realize that your toxic behavior has put you in a pretty messed up situation, or a cyclically toxic situation, or in a place where you keep running from one toxic job or romantic relationship to another, when you are actually choosing these things for yourself, you're not attracting them, you are choosing them by your own will because you are a sovereign being. It is your free will in this life to choose toxicity. You get to choose it, okay? You get to choose that every day. That's the power of shadow work, knowing that you get to choose that, okay? Or you can choose better for yourself by starting to communicate with that part of you. I love shadow work. So much fun. So we want to forgive our shadow, okay? We want to be compassionate with our shadow because, again, all of these behaviors and emotions and responses that we're not willing to take accountability for, they all came from that wounded space where we were younger and where we didn't know how to cope with life. So we developed those oral fixations with food. We developed those needs to cope and medicate ourselves through toxic relationships and behaviors. This is just how the nature of the shadow is. Okay. So we never really want to reprimand our shadow, because when you reprimand your shadow and you punish yourself, you end up punishing yourself, which in and of itself is a shadow response. It's a shadow toxic response when you are punishing yourself in any way. Okay. You don't want to be putting yourself in timeout or calling yourself your shadow names, because when you start to exhibit that behavior, your shadow then recedes back into you. And when your shadow has receded into you, but it has not been integrated, that's where trouble happens. That's where the trouble happens, because it's like having murkiness at the bottom of a stagnant puddle, which is the emotional psychic realm. This is where the shadow exists. And when we don't integrate it, the shadow exists in the emotional psychic realm. Okay. And lack of acknowledging that is like having murkiness at the bottom of a puddle. And when you are triggered, unbeknownst to yourself, you go to reach out and grab that thing, and you realize you have that blister on your finger. And now there's that ouch. And then there is that automated emotional response. The shadow then stirs the water of that stagnant puddle, and now you're popping off. And now you're back at it again. And now you're binge eating and you're binge watching and you are being promiscuous. And now you're over here and you're quitting this job. Like, do you see how the cycle perpetuates itself? So this is why we have to be very careful about how we handle our shadow self. Okay. Very important. We don't punish ourselves as goddesses. We are always compassionate. So we are having those conversations with our shadow self and listening for whatever comes up. For whatever comes up, we never ignore our parts. Okay. If you find that you have lust over something or someone that you are not supposed to feel that way about it, you don't send it and relegate it off into the timeout chair and the we don't acknowledge you space. It doesn't work, because anything that you ignore is going to come back with a vengeance. Okay. That's why we have to do all of our work. We have to do all of our work as goddesses. And we do that in the Feminine Alchemy and Freedom Activator course. I teach you how to cut and clear cords, how to clear yourself from those karmic patterns. They don't just go away. You have to be very intentional with how you process these things out of yourself, out of your body, mind, soul ship. Okay. So we're never ignoring ourselves. We are learning to identify our shadows, and we are learning to forgive our shadow selves for the places that it has landed us in. Because we already respect that we are becoming emotionally current and that these emotions had a place once upon a time, you then become very comfortable with having these questions about why your shadow is driving the wheel of your life, driving the car, the vehicle of your life. Okay, so those first 4 steps of being emotionally current, finding the origin of that emotional and that behavioral pattern, finding the origin of it, and asking yourself the questions about where they came from and why they are here now, why they're showing up now, and asking yourself, is this something that's real? Is it current, or is it just an automated response? Okay. And then asking yourself, why am I doing this behavior right now? What is it? What is being filled by this? Being very clear with your shadow about that, and then forgiving yourself for it. Those 4 steps alone, you can sit in those 4 steps and just work on those for, 6 months, a year, 2 years, a few years, depending on how long it takes you to integrate and to understand and be honest with yourself about what your shadow activity is and who the shadow side of you, insert your name here, is. Okay. Once you get comfortable with recognizing and acknowledging and getting comfortable with asking yourself those questions without being triggered, okay, and being really honest with yourself, because you can hide from the world, but you can't hide from yourself. Although you really can hide from yourself, which is what I found when I really started to get deeply spiritual. You can. But once you start doing shadow work, it's very hard for you to hide from yourself. And you're powerful when you can't hide from yourself. When you know exactly where to find the different parts of yourself, you become powerful. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is modulate and self-regulate. So you're going to learn how to modulate and how to self-regulate. Okay. And when you are modulating and when you are self-regulating, you are really starting to validate more why your shadow self and the part of you that you don't let drive the vehicle, you start to validate those feelings because your shadow has a wisdom in and of her own. Your shadow self is going to show you where your boundaries lie with certain things. Your shadows are going to show you where your boundaries lie in your interrelations and your relationships. And your shadow self is also going to show you where your boundaries lie within you. So if you're constantly partaking in an activity, okay, and it is becoming consequential, like you're up and you're getting high really late at night when you know you got to wake up and go to work and be functional the next day, and you're doing that regularly, guilty, okay? Not currently, but in the past, absolutely, you know? Once you start to know that, you can start to modulate that behavior, okay? And you start to say, I'm going to draw this boundary here in this particular season. I know that I got to get this done. I have this deadline. I have this goal that I want to reach for myself. I'm going to modulate that activity, and I'll let that side of myself breathe during another season. Okay? Because the shadows are there oftentimes to help us cope with things. But once you elevate to a certain level, there's nothing to actually have to cope from in life, because now you have shifted your nervous system and your body and your vibration to one that is always in a pattern of positivity. And your hormones and your biochemistry is one that is always peaceful and that it's positive. But you can only get to that space when you are working through this process and through these type of these wisdoms, okay? And this is just my personal experience that I'm sharing with you because it has changed my entire quality of life. Shadow work has changed my entire quality of life. So modulating your shadow self is knowing that, let's say someone is confronting you about something and they're doing it publicly, okay? This would be an example of modulating your shadow, step number 5, which is going to take us into step number 6. So let's say that someone is pressing your buttons and your shadow, so this is you, how you show up in this experience. Then you have someone in your environment that's pressing your buttons, right? And your shadow self is right there saying, I want to resort to these old behaviors that I know I used to resort to. But you, because you know your shadow self and how she behaves and how she's tapping on your shoulder, you know yourself well enough to catch it and rein her back in before anything even happens, before anyone even knows that that's there. Okay, you modulate it, and then you decide that the way in which you want to modulate it, you want to rein it back, but then you can come back and you can set a healthy boundary at a time which you feel very much in control of yourself primarily, and you are in a better place of advantage in the situation. You can then come back and you can respond to that situation because you have now grounded yourself, you've consulted your shadow, and you determine how it is you want to respond from a premeditated way. Let's put it that way. Okay. And that's when you can actually start to have fun with your shadow. Because again, on this page, if you've been rocking with me for the last few months, you know that it is not all love and light, that we have to be fierce warriors of our boundaries in order to protect our sacred peace and our divinity. So the shadow self has a place, especially in a world that can be as ghetto as the one that we live in. You need to have your shadow side activated. Instead of making your shadow your enemy, you want to use your shadow as a tool for self-protection, okay? We don't use our darker parts of ourselves for harm against anyone. We use it to protect our boundaries of ourself and our peace and of our loved ones, okay? Guarantee you, if somebody tries to mess with my family, they're going to see my shadow self, or someone that I love, you're going to see the shadow side of me, guaranteed. Okay. My people are protected. I have a strong circle of protective energy around me. And I've mentioned this before in previous videos. Okay. So you can have fun with your shadow when you learn self-discipline and self-control. And when you find that there is an appropriate instance where you can positively assert your boundaries and allow your shadow to chime in and support you with how you are going to facilitate those boundaries, drop that heart below if you understand what I'm talking about. Okay. Then this is where the power comes from. It is not the power over anyone else. It is simply the power over yourself, because you are fully aware of your capabilities as a divine being and as a sacred instrument of divine light in this world. Because as goddesses and as women, if we don't start to set healthier boundaries for ourselves, we will be picked off. Our energy will be drained and sucked away by people that are predators of our energy. Okay. And if you are not in a peaceful place with your shadow self, you can't even defend or protect yourself. Okay. You can't see this world from an accurate lens, because everything is not all love and light in this world. It's just the truth. Okay. Everywhere we go, we are being confronted with the fact that we are in a spiritual war for our souls and for our consciousness, with how they are perpetuating how women are supposed to look, which is why women are having eating disorders and out of control of their comfort in their bodies. Okay. And we're just allowing ourselves to be used by men that don't have positive intentions for us, to go into these jobs that are draining us, that don't really care about our actual personal well-being. When you step into your shadow self and you recognize that and you respect the opinion of your shadow self, you're in a job that you don't like, you realize when you start to integrate that no, you don't want to be there, but yes, it serves its purpose. And so you are able to show up. You are able to show up for that for as long as it serves you. Okay. So I'm getting a little intense here because I'm fully integrated. Okay. And I encourage you to start to fully integrate yourself. So a couple more pointers before we wrap up this video are: how can you know that you're dealing with shadow behavior and with the shadow side of life? Okay. The shadow itself, just to call it out, generally speaking, is embedded into the consciousness of humanity. It is embedded into the psyche of humanity, just like religion. Okay. We know that there are things that are good, things that are bad. Okay. So the shadow self is typically going to be the big no-nos, the big no-nos. Okay. And those are the 7 deadly sins. All right. So typically, for example, they would be pride, okay, or conceit. They're going to be envy, jealousy. You're jealous of someone. That's a shadow habit, having jealousy towards someone. And jealousy has its place. Are you seeing how everything has its use? When you're jealous of someone, that means that there's a part of you that is actually inspired with what it is you are jealous of. There's a part of you that feels smaller than what you are seeing outside of you that is inciting jealousy. And instead of saying, oh, the shadow self, letting the shadow self talk badly about what it is you know on a deep internal honest level with yourself you want. So because you feel like you can't have it, that thing, remember step number 3, because you feel like you can't have it or you're not worthy, all you think to do is to talk badly on that person. Okay. But when you embrace your shadow, you realize maybe I would like that. So maybe let me look and see what that kind of lifestyle, what that thing that I covet or that I'm jealous of, what would that look like for me? Rather than focusing on throwing the evil eye at people, ask yourself what that would look like for you. Okay. Anger. Anger, a big no-no, losing, flipping your can, losing your lid. Anger is basically going to show us where are your boundaries at? Okay, where do you need to stand up for yourself? How is your anger manifesting? Is your anger manifesting outwardly? Okay, that means that you need to work a little bit harder on managing your internal environment and alchemizing environments that are more in alignment with who you actually need to be, who you came to be, rather than coming back up against and focusing all of your precious masculine energy, because we don't have a whole lot of masculine energy, but we're not supposed to have a whole bunch of masculine energy as the divine feminine. We are supposed to be living through our feminine energy. And if you're always angry, that means that somewhere within your solar plexus, you've got a masculine energy imbalance and you need to calm down and chill out. Go work that out in the gym. Okay. Which is going to lead me to my last point. I'll come back to anger. Okay. Lust. Lust is the big one. You know, thou shalt not lust. Don't have a need for pleasure. God forbid a woman lust and have sexual pleasures or be sexually or sensually explicit. That's a big no-no. Okay. That's a natural part of who we are. Your lust and your desire and your sexual desire can be alchemized to create beautiful things in this world. Okay. I have a lust for life. Anything or anyone that I lust after, that I know may or may not be toxic for me, I alchemize that sexual energy inside of my womb. This is bioenergetics for baddies. Okay. I alchemize that inside of my womb and I create more with that. I create through my voice. I transmit that energy through my voice so that I can bring forth these powerful messages. I redirect and alchemize that energy. Okay. Gluttony, overeating, overdoing anything. Okay. It means that you have this bottomless pit that needs to be filled with something that is more substantive. I hope that's the right word. That's probably not the right word, but y'all know what I mean. Then just the eating of the food. Okay. And the overdoing of something that's just scraping the surface. If you find yourself in gluttonous acts, that is because you are not scraping the bottom of your well. Like, you need to be filled on a deeper level. You need to find your passions in life. Okay. Greed, same thing with greed, overeating. I'm trying to understand the difference between gluttony and greed. I probably should have looked that up. But I almost see them as the same, but I gotta do a little bit more research on that. But greed is, overdoing anything, a need for more than what you actually need. Learning how to be balanced, learning how to be satiated in life, learning how to have gratitude with what you have. That's gratitude work. When you feel like you're not satiated and you just need more and more and more to feel you, it's because you got to learn how to be grateful for what you have and learn how to appreciate what you already have. And then there's sloth. Sloth is when you have no activated masculine energy and you are just dragging yourself about and waiting for life to happen to you, waiting for someone to rescue you. Those people that are just waiting for something, waiting for that check to hit, waiting for that raise, waiting for next year. That's sloth. Okay. You're just too tired to get yourself motivated. You need a swift kick of masculine energy in your life to get you supercharged. And at the end of the day, the last thing that we are really realizing with this whole thing, this whole lecture today is about, this whole training is about goddess alchemy. So goddess alchemy is when we are taking these elements and when we are taking these aspects of ourselves and we are shifting our pains and the hardships and the challenges of our life into something that is going to be more beautiful and more withstanding than those darker, heavier frequencies. We're really transforming those things and elevating them into something that's actually going to work for us. So for me, it was my anger. Y'all, I grew up being very angry, alternating between a lot of anger and depression, which they say depression is anger directed inward. Because when you are depressed, it typically goes back to something that you were angry about that you feel powerless over. Think about that. So that's the final message, okay? Is alchemizing. So when I was dealing with anger, what I did was I started to work out and I started to take all of that energy. This was before, the Celsius drinks, not a paid advertisement. And I was raw dogging my workouts, just like raw dogging life because I had that much anger in me about the unfairness that I was experiencing and like just feeling so upset at my lot in life. I changed that by going to the gym and working my ass off and really channeling all of that force, all of that masculine energy into something that I could control, which was my body. And I learned how to slay from that anger. I transmuted that shit through the use of goddess alchemy, and I leveled up to become the baddie that I am today. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, this training. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, drop that black heart below if you resonated with this message and you made it this far. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. One love. Mwah.